I picked up the gold pen, his pen, the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, and clicked it open. The sound echoed through the conference room like a gunshot. "You're not even going to read it?" Marcus's lawyer, Gerald, looked at me with barely concealed contempt, his jowls quivering with satisfaction. He pushed the severance package across the mahogany table, the papers crisp and white and damning. I met his eyes and smiled. "No." The room fell silent. Marcus shifted in his seat beside his lawyer, confusion flickering across his handsome face. The face I'd loved for 8 years. The face that had smiled at me across our wedding altar. The face that had lied to me for the last 3 of those years. His mother, Patricia, sat on his other side, her diamond rings catching the light as she folded her hands with the satisfaction of a cat who'd finally cornered a mouse. "Darling," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "perhaps you should have your lawyer review." "Oh, wait. You don't have one, do you?" I could feel their eyes on me. Marcus, Patricia, Gerald, even the stenographer in the corner seemed to lean forward, waiting for me to break, to cry, to beg. This was their moment of triumph. The moment they'd been planning for months, maybe years. I clicked the pen again, feeling its weight in my hand. In another life, my first life, I had sat in this exact chair, in this exact room with these exact people, and I had broken. I had sobbed. I had signed their papers with shaking hands, not understanding that I was signing away everything. The house Marcus and I had built, the company I'd help him create with my inheritance, the life I'd thought we'd share forever. In that first life, I'd walked out of this building with nothing but a small settlement, barely enough to cover rent for a year. Marcus had married Vanessa, his secretary, 3 months later in a ceremony that cost more than our entire wedding. They'd moved into our dream house, the one overlooking the bay. Patricia had thrown Vanessa a baby shower in my old garden, and I had drunk myself to death in a studio apartment by the time I was 35, alone and forgotten, my obituary a 3-line afterthought in the local paper. But then I woke up. I woke up 7 months ago, the morning of my 30th birthday, to Marcus kissing my forehead and saying, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I have a special dinner planned tonight." I'd known immediately what day it was. The last birthday he'd pretend to love me before serving me with divorce papers a week later. The knowledge had hit me like ice water. I was back. I had been given a second chance. And this time, I'd made very different choices. "Alexandria?" Gerald prompted, tapping the papers. "If you could just sign at the bottom of each page, initial here, here, and here." I leaned forward, the pen poised over the signature line. I could smell Patricia's expensive perfume, see the tiny smirk playing at Marcus's lips. They thought they'd won. They thought I was the same broken, naive woman who'd believed every lie, who'd worked 60-hour weeks to build Marcus's company while he was fucking Vanessa on the desk I'd bought him. "Just to be clear," I said softly, my eyes on the page, "once I sign this, we're done. The marriage is dissolved, the assets divided per this agreement, no further claims from either party." "Exactly," Gerald said quickly. "You'll receive the settlement amount specified on page 12 within 30 days. And perfect," I said, and signed my name with a flourish. The pen scratched across paper. Alexandria Marie Hartford. Over and over, on each page, each initial, each signature line. I didn't read a single word. I didn't need to, because 3 months ago, the morning after I'd woken up in my old life, I'd walked into the office of Catherine Chen, the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. A woman whose name I'd only learned in my first life when I'd read about her in a magazine while waiting at a free clinic, too poor to afford real health care. In that article, she'd been representing a CEO's wife in a divorce that had made national news. The wife had walked away with $300 million. "I need your help," I told Catherine that morning, sitting in her corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "My husband is going to file for divorce. He's hiding assets. He's been planning this for years, and I need you to destroy him." Catherine had looked at me over her reading glasses, her silver bob perfectly styled, her red lipstick immaculate. "Tell me everything." And I had, everything I knew from my first life. The offshore accounts Marcus had set up using my father's inheritance, the shell corporations he'd created with Vanessa's brother, the real estate purchases hidden in his mother's name, the stocks he'd sold short that I'd technically owned half of. I'd kept a journal in my first life, tracking every strange transaction, every suspicious meeting, trying to understand where our money had gone. In my grief and confusion, I'd never put the pieces together. But Catherine did. "This is a complex case," she'd said, tapping her pen against her legal pad. "Your husband is sophisticated, but he's also arrogant. Men like him always make mistakes. And Mrs. Hartford, if you do exactly as I say, I will get you everything he's tried to hide, everything he's stolen from you, everything he thinks he's entitled to." "How much?" I'd asked. She'd smiled then, sharp as a blade. "In a standard divorce with your assets, you'd be looking at about $4 million, maybe $5 million if we fought hard. But with what you've told me, with the fraud I can already see." She'd leaned forward. "Triple that, at least." For 3 months, Catherine had worked in absolute secrecy. I'd paid her retainer from a private account my father had set up for me before he died. One Marcus had never known about. She'd hired forensic accountants, private investigators, expert witnesses. She'd subpoenaed records, deposed witnesses, built a case that would bury Marcus and his mother and Vanessa and everyone who'd helped them steal from me. And through it all, I'd played my part perfectly. I'd been the devoted wife. I'd smiled at Marcus across the dinner table. I'd kissed him goodnight. I'd even pretended not to notice when he claimed he had late meetings that ended at 2 a.m., smelling of Vanessa's perfume. Because I knew exactly what was coming. I'd lived through it once before. When Marcus had served me with divorce papers last week, right on schedule, exactly as he had in my first life, I'd cried. I'd begged him to reconsider. I'd asked what I'd done wrong. I'd played the role of the devastated wife with such conviction that even Patricia had seemed almost sympathetic for half a second. "It's not you, Alex," Marcus had said, using the nickname he'd once claimed was ours. I need to find myself. I'm not happy anymore. I think we'd both be better off apart." The same script, word for word. And when he'd suggested we keep things simple and use his lawyer to draft the settlement, to save money, since things are going to be tight for both of us, I'd nodded tearfully and agreed, just like I had the first time. But this time, Catherine's papers were already filed. This time, her forensic accountants had already traced every hidden dollar. This time, I had everything I needed to bury him. "There," I said, setting down the pen. "All signed." Gerald gathered the papers with barely suppressed glee. "Excellent. You'll receive your copy by mail, and the settlement funds will be transferred." The conference room door opened. Catherine Chen walked in like a queen entering her throne room. She wore a black Armani suit that probably cost more than Marcus's car, and she carried a briefcase that I knew contained enough evidence to destroy everything he'd built on my back. Behind her came 2 associates, a man and a woman, both carrying additional boxes of documents. "Ms. Chen," Gerald sputtered, his face going red. "This is a private mediation." "Was," Catherine corrected smoothly, setting her briefcase on the table with a decisive thunk. "It was a private mediation. Now it's a representation hearing. I'm Catherine Chen, lead counsel for Mrs. Hartford. These are my associates, David Park and Jennifer Ruiz. We'll be taking over from here." I watched the color drain from Marcus's face. Even in my first life, when I'd been so naive, so trusting, I'd heard of Catherine Chen. Everyone had. She was famous for making powerful men cry in depositions. She was legendary for finding hidden assets. She didn't just win cases, she annihilated opposing counsel. "Alex," Marcus said, his voice strangled, "what is this? You said you didn't need a lawyer. You said—" "I said a lot of things," I replied, examining my nails. In my first life, I'd bitten them to the quick from stress. Now they were perfectly manicured, painted a deep red that matched Catherine's lipstick. "I said I loved you too. We both know how much that was worth." Patricia's hand flew to her chest. "This is an ambush. Gerald, do something." "I'm afraid there's nothing to do," Catherine said pleasantly, pulling documents from her briefcase. "You see, the papers Mrs. Hartford just signed weren't yours." She slid a thick stack across the table. "They were mine." The room went silent except for the whisper of paper on wood. Mrs. Hartford signed a counter petition, Catherine continued, which I filed with the court this morning at 9 a.m., approximately 30 minutes before this meeting. The petition includes a full forensic accounting of all marital assets, evidence of Mr. Hartford's fraud, and documentation of, she pulled out a slim folder, several rather interesting offshore accounts. Gerald grabbed the papers, his hands shaking. I watched him read, watched his face go from red to white to gray. Marcus leaned over, trying to see, his breath coming faster. "This is," Gerald stammered, "you can't. These accounts are funded with Mrs. Hartford's inheritance from her late father," Catherine finished. "Yes, we know. We also know about the shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, the real estate purchases made in Patricia Hartford's name, but paid for with marital funds, and the rather creative accounting that's been hiding approximately $18 million in assets that should have been disclosed. I'd known it was bad. In my first life, I'd suspected Marcus was hiding money. But $18 million? I'd helped him build a company worth maybe $10 million. Where had the rest come from?" 8 years, Catherine said, and there was steel in her voice now. 8 years of Mrs. Hartford's labor, her inheritance, her connections, her trust. And you thought you could buy her off with $200,000? She laughed, cold and sharp. "Gentlemen, Ms. Hartford, let me tell you what's actually going to happen." She nodded to David, who began pulling out more documents. Each page that hit the table felt like a nail in Marcus's coffin. First, the marital home, the one Mrs. Hartford's father helped purchase with a $500,000 down payment from her inheritance. We have the wire transfer records. That home, currently valued at $2.3 million, will be awarded entirely to Mrs. Hartford. Marcus made a choking sound. That was the house. Our house. The one where he'd planned to install Vanessa. The one with the nursery already painted for the baby I didn't know about yet. Second, Hartford Enterprises. The company Mrs. Hartford helped found with her business connections, her marketing expertise, and $1.2 million of her inheritance. We have the original business plan in her handwriting. We have emails showing she negotiated the first 3 major contracts. We have testimony from former employees about her role. Catherine smiled. Mrs. Hartford will receive 60% ownership. 60%? Patricia shrieked. That's Marcus's company. He built it. With her money, her contacts, and her labor, while conducting an affair with his secretary and embezzling funds to offshore accounts, Catherine said calmly. Trust me, Patricia, 60% is generous. We could argue for 80%. I watched Marcus's world crumble in real time. Hartford Enterprises was his baby, his pride. In my first life, he'd built it into an empire, taking it public 5 years after our divorce. The IPO had made him a multimillionaire while I'd been scraping by on welfare. The offshore accounts, Catherine continued, pulling out bank statements I'd never seen before. All of them will be repatriated and split 70-30 in Mrs. Hartford's favor, as they were funded primarily with her inheritance. That's approximately $12.6 million. Jennifer, the other associate, started laying out photos. Marcus with Vanessa, entering hotels, leaving her apartment, kissing in his car. The timestamps went back 3 years, exactly as I'd told Catherine. The affair, Catherine said softly, is just the cherry on top. In this state, adultery affects asset division significantly. You were having me followed? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he realized he didn't know me at all. Alex, how could you? How could I? I leaned forward and all the rage I'd buried for 3 months came flooding out. How could you, Marcus? I worked 60-hour weeks to build your company. I used my inheritance, my father's legacy, to make your dreams come true. I networked. I pitched clients. I skipped meals so we could hire better employees. And while I was doing that, you were fucking your secretary on the desk I bought you. Patricia gasped. Alexandria, language? Shut up, I snapped, and the shock on her face was almost worth everything else. You knew. The whole time, you knew. You helped him hide money, Patricia. You put property in your name. You covered for his lies. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was stupid? In my first life, I'd never confronted her. I'd been too beaten down, too depressed. But I dreamed about it in that studio apartment while I was dying. I dreamed about saying these words. You told me I wasn't good enough for your son, I continued, my voice shaking. You said I was lucky he'd married me. You made me feel small and worthless and grateful for scraps of affection. And the whole time you were helping him rob me blind. Mrs. Hartford, Catherine said gently, putting a hand on my arm. She didn't need to say more. She'd warned me not to lose control, to stay calm, to let the evidence speak for itself. I took a breath and sat back. Sorry. Don't be. Catherine returned her attention to Gerald, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Now let's talk about the settlement Mrs. Hartford actually signed. She pulled out one final document, the one I'd signed with Marcus's gold pen just minutes ago. This agreement stipulates that Mr. Hartford admits to all charges of fraud and adultery, agrees to the asset division as outlined, and waives all rights to appeal. In exchange, Mrs. Hartford agrees not to press criminal charges for the embezzlement of her inheritance, which technically constitutes felony fraud. Criminal charges? Marcus's voice cracked. You stole $1.2 million from your wife and hid it in offshore accounts, Catherine said pleasantly. That's not creative accounting, Mr. Hartford. That's a crime. Mrs. Hartford could have you arrested. She's chosen not to, provided you agree to these terms. I watched, understanding dawn. They'd thought they were settling a simple divorce. They'd thought they were giving me pennies while keeping the kingdom. But I'd just agreed not to send Marcus to prison in exchange for everything he'd stolen, plus interest, plus damages, plus the punishment of watching me walk away with the life he'd tried to take. Let me summarize, Catherine said, pulling out a calculator. Mrs. Hartford will receive the marital home valued at $2.3 million, 60% of Hartford Enterprises valued conservatively at $6 million, 70% of the offshore accounts, approximately $12.6 million. Her original inheritance returned with interest, $1.4 million, and punitive damages for adultery and fraud, $2 million. She looked up. That's $24.3 million, Mr. Hartford, roughly triple what you're worth, which means you'll be selling off assets, liquidating accounts, and possibly taking loans to pay your wife what you owe her. The number hung in the air like a bomb, $24 million. In my first life, I'd gotten $200,000 and thought I was lucky. Marcus stood up so fast his chair fell over. This is insane. I'll fight this. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing, Catherine said coldly, because you already signed the agreement too. She pulled out another document, one Gerald must have prepared. Your petition, the one Mrs. Hartford signed, it had an identical clause. By presenting these terms for her signature, you automatically agreed to accept whatever counterterms she presented. It's standard language in mediation agreements. You signed it last week. She smiled. You should really read things before you sign them, Mr. Hartford. The room erupted. Marcus was shouting. Patricia was crying. Gerald was frantically flipping through papers, trying to find a loophole. Any loophole. But Catherine Chen didn't leave loopholes. I stood up, smoothing down my dress, a Chanel piece I'd bought last week with my secret account. The account Marcus had never known about. The one thing I'd managed to keep safe in both lives. I think we're done here, I said. Catherine nodded. My client has nothing further to discuss. We'll see you in court for the final decree, Mr. Hartford, or rather, you'll see my associates. I doubt Ms. Hartford wants to waste any more of her valuable time on you. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Behind me, I could hear Marcus still arguing, Patricia wailing, Gerald trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Alex! Marcus's voice stopped me. I turned. He looked destroyed. His perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, his face flushed with rage and panic. This was the man I'd loved for 8 years, the man I'd built a life with, the man who destroyed me so completely that I died alone and forgotten. How long? He asked. How long have you known? I could have told him the truth, that I'd lived this before, that God or fate or the universe had given me a second chance, that I'd known every move he would make because I'd already lived through it once. But that felt like giving him something he didn't deserve. Long enough, I said instead. I know about Vanessa. I know about the baby. I know you were planning to marry her in June in the garden of our house, the one I'm keeping. I know you thought you could throw me away like garbage and live happily ever after with my money. His face went white. How did you... You're not as smart as you think you are, Marcus. You're just used to people underestimating you. I smiled, and it felt good, so good. I won't make that mistake again. I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. The next 3 months were a blur of paperwork and court dates that I mostly didn't attend. Catherine handled everything, her associates updating me regularly on Marcus's increasingly desperate attempts to hide assets or negotiate better terms. Each attempt failed. Catherine had been thorough. She'd built an airtight case. The Hartford Enterprises board voted to remove Marcus as CEO when news of the fraud leaked. They installed me instead, unanimously. Turned out a lot of people had suspected what he was doing, but hadn't had proof. I had proof. The house, my house now, was everything I dreamed it would be. I changed the locks the day the decree was finalized. I painted over the nursery Marcus had prepared for Vanessa's baby. I turned it into an office where I could overlook the bay and plan the future of my company. Because it was mine now. Hartford Enterprises, the company I'd helped build, the company Marcus had stolen, it was mine. And I was going to make it into something he could never have imagined. Vanessa left him 2 weeks after the decree. Apparently, she'd been attracted to his money, not his personality. Who knew? Patricia lost the house she'd hidden in her name. It had been bought with marital funds, so it was mine too. I sold it and donated the proceeds to a women's shelter. The look on her face when she found out was worth more than the money. Marcus tried to call me exactly once. I was in my office, the corner office that had been his with its view of the city, when his number appeared on my phone. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Alex, he said, and his voice was broken. Please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Can we talk? I looked out at the city, at the life I'd built from the ashes of the one he'd destroyed. In my first life, I would have said yes. I would have believed him. I might have even taken him back. No, I said and hung up. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, a $500 vintage I'd never have afforded in my first life. I sat on the deck of my house watching the sun set over the bay, and I thought about the woman I'd been before. The naive woman who'd believed in love and trust and happily ever after. The broken woman who'd died alone, clutching a bottle of cheap vodka, her obituary a footnote. I wasn't her anymore. I would never be her again. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Congratulations. Hartford Enterprises stock is up 15% since you took over. I knew you'd be brilliant. I smiled and texted back, thank you for everything. That's what you paid me for, she replied. But for the record, you didn't need me to be strong. You already were. You just needed the right tools. Maybe she was right. Maybe in my first life, with Catherine's help, I could have fought back, could have won. But I'd never know. This was the life I had now, the one I'd earned, the one I'd fought for, the one I'd taken back from the people who'd tried to steal it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Hartford Enterprises secured its biggest contract ever, a $50 million deal with a tech conglomerate I'd been courting for years. Marcus had always said we weren't ready for clients that big. But I knew we were. I'd always known. The celebration party was at the house, my house, with its bay view and its garden and its office, where I'd planned this victory. I'd invited the entire company, all the people who'd worked so hard to make this happen. They filled the rooms with laughter and music and joy. Catherine came, elegant as always in a silver dress. You've done well, she said, accepting a glass of champagne. We've done well, I corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. She studied me for a moment. I'm going to tell you something I don't tell many clients. When you walked into my office that first day, I almost turned you away. Why? Because you seemed too soft, too damaged. I thought you'd break under the pressure, that you'd back out, that you'd forgive him halfway through and waste my time. She sipped her champagne. I'm glad I was wrong. I was that woman once, I admitted. In another life, I was exactly that soft, that damaged, and it destroyed me. Catherine raised her glass. Then here's to becoming the woman you were meant to be. We drank, and I tasted victory. A year after the divorce, I was on the cover of Business Weekly. Hartford's Triumph, How Alexandria Hartford Turned Betrayal into a Business Empire, the headline read. The article detailed Hartford Enterprises' meteoric rise, the innovative strategies I'd implemented, the culture I'd built. It mentioned the divorce only in passing. Hartford recently emerged from a difficult divorce but has channeled that experience into her leadership philosophy: trust, transparency, and treating employees with the respect they deserve. Marcus probably read it. I hoped he did. I hoped it hurt. But the truth was, I barely thought about him anymore. He was a chapter I'd closed, a lesson I'd learned, a mistake I'd survived. He wasn't worth my energy or my anger or my time. I had a company to run. I had a life to live. I had a future that was entirely, completely, finally mine. 2 years after the divorce, I got an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic? Rising from the Ashes, How to Rebuild After Betrayal. I almost declined. I wasn't sure I wanted to talk about Marcus, about the divorce, about any of it. That life felt like it belonged to someone else. But then I thought about the woman I'd been in my first life. The woman who'd died alone, believing she was worthless, believing she deserved what happened to her. And I thought about all the other women out there who might be living that life right now, who might need to hear that there was another way. So I said yes. The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of women, all ages, all backgrounds. I stood at the podium and looked out at them, and I saw myself reflected back, the ones who'd been betrayed, the ones who'd been underestimated, the ones who'd been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, strong enough. I was married to a man who stole from me, I began, who cheated on me, who made me believe I was lucky to have him, even as he was planning to discard me like trash. And for a long time, I believed him. I believed I was worthless. I believed I deserved it. The room was silent. But then something changed. I woke up one day and realized I had a choice. I could accept the narrative he'd written for me, or I could write my own. I could let him take everything, or I could fight back. I told them about Catherine Chen, about the 3 months of secret preparation, about walking into that conference room and signing the papers without reading them, knowing I'd already won. The thing they don't tell you about revenge, I said, is that the best kind isn't personal. It's not about hurting them back. It's about taking back what was always yours, your power, your worth, your future. It's about proving that you were never the person they said you were. When I finished, the applause was deafening. Women lined up afterward to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me their stories. So many stories, so much pain, but also so much strength. How did you know? One woman asked me. She was young, maybe 25, with tired eyes. How did you know it was time to fight back? I thought about my first life, about dying alone with nothing. I thought about waking up with a second chance and deciding that this time would be different. Because I'd already lost everything once, I told her. And I promised myself I'd never lose it again. 5 years after the divorce, Hartford Enterprises went public. The IPO was everything I'd dreamed of and more. We raised $200 million, the stock opened at $45 a share, and closed the first day at 67. I was interviewed by every major business publication. Forbes put me on their self-made women list. And on the day of the IPO, I thought about Marcus. Just for a moment, I wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he saw the news, if he understood what he'd lost. Then I stopped wondering. Because it didn't matter. I rang the opening bell at NASDAQ, surrounded by my team. The people who'd believed in my vision, who'd worked endless hours to make this happen, who'd proven that we could build something extraordinary together. Catherine was there, smiling proudly from the balcony. She'd become more than my lawyer over the years. She'd become my friend, my mentor, my sister in arms. When the bell rang and the applause erupted, I felt something I'd never felt in my first life: peace. Not happiness exactly, not joy, just peace. The quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd taken back everything that was mine and built something even better from the ruins. That night, alone in my penthouse apartment, I'd sold the house eventually, too many ghosts. I opened my laptop and wrote an email to Catherine Chenet, Chenet Associates, subject. Thank you, Catherine. I've been thinking about that first day in your office when I told you my husband was going to divorce me and I needed your help to destroy him. I was so scared, so angry, so determined not to let him win. You asked me once why I didn't just take a fair settlement and move on, why I needed to fight for every penny. And I told you it was about justice. That was true. But it was also about proving to myself that I wasn't the woman he'd made me believe I was. The weak one, the stupid one, the one who deserved to be thrown away. Tonight, watching our stock price climb, watching the company I built become something real and permanent and mine, I realized I'd proven it. Not just to Marcus, not just to everyone who'd underestimated me. To myself. So thank you for believing in me when I barely believed in myself. For giving me the tools to fight back. For showing me that I was always stronger than I thought. Here's to the women who rebuild, who fight back. Who refuse to accept the stories other people write for them. Here's to us. Alex. She responded within minutes. Here's to us. And to all the battles still to come. By the way, I'm raising my rates. You've made me famous. Every woman in the city wants to hire me now, worth every penny, wasn't it? Okay, I laughed out loud, alone in my apartment, and thought, yes, it was worth every penny. Every tear. Every sleepless night. Every moment of fear and doubt and rage. Because I'd won. Not the way Marcus says, had won in my first life, by taking what wasn't his, by hurting someone who loved him, by building an empire on someone else's foundation. I'd won by taking back what was mine, by building something better than he ever could have, by proving that I was exactly as strong, as smart, as capable as I'd always believed I was, deep down, before he'd convinced me otherwise. 10 years after the divorce, I got married again. Her name was Sarah, and she was a professor of literature at the university. We'd met at a charity gala, bonded over our shared love of obscure poetry and expensive wine, and fallen in love slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberate intention that only comes from having been burned before. She knew my history. I'd told her everything on our third date, figuring it was better to scare her away early if she was going to run. But she hadn't run. She'd listened, and then she'd taken my hand and said, "I'm so glad you fought back. The world needs more women who fight back." We got married on the deck of a house in the mountains, just us and a handful of close friends. Catherine was my best woman. She cried, which surprised both of us. "I never thought I'd see you happy," she admitted afterward, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I mean, successful, yes. Powerful, absolutely. But happy, that's the real revenge. She was right. Marcus had taken so much from me in my first life. My money, my home, my company, my pride. But the worst thing he'd taken was my ability to trust, to love, to believe that happiness was possible. Getting that back, that was the victory that mattered most. 15 years after the divorce, I saw Marcus one last time. It was at a business conference in New York. I was the keynote speaker, talking about sustainable growth strategies. He was in the audience somewhere in the back. I only noticed him because someone mentioned it afterward. "Did you see your ex-husband was here?" I hadn't. I'd been too focused on my speech, on the ideas I wanted to share, on the business I'd built. But later, at the hotel bar, he found me. "Alex," he said, and his voice was older, tired. "Can we talk?" I looked at him. Really looked at him. He'd aged badly, graying hair, lines around his eyes. a stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He looked like what he was, a man who'd made all the wrong choices and spent 15 years living with the consequences. Sure, I said, because I was curious, because I couldn't imagine what he possibly had to say after all this time. We sat at a corner table. He ordered whiskey. I ordered sparkling water. I'd stopped drinking years ago after Sarah pointed out that I only ever had wine when I was stressed. I've been following your career, Marcus said finally. Hartford Enterprises, the IPO, the expansion into Asia. You've done incredible things. Thank you. I wanted to say, he paused, struggling for words. I'm sorry for everything. I was young and then stupid and greedy, and I hurt you in ways I didn't even understand at the time. I waited. There had to be more. Vanessa left me 6 months after the divorce. Did you know that? I knew. Of course you did. He laughed bitterly. I lost everything, Alex. The company, the house, my reputation. I've been working as a consultant for the past decade, making a fraction of what I used to earn. My mother barely speaks to me. I'm alone. I sipped my water and said nothing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. He continued. If I'd been honest with you. If we'd built Hartford Enterprises together, as partners, the way we should have from the start. We'd probably be divorced anyway, I said honestly. Just with less drama. He looked up surprised. I'm gay, Marcus. I think I always was, but I was too young and scared to admit it. We were never going to work long term. I smiled. But that doesn't excuse what you did. Stealing from me, lying to me, trying to destroy me, that was all you. I know. He stared into his drink. I wanted you to know I was sorry. That I've thought about it every day for 15 years. That I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I thought about my first life, about dying alone and bitter and full of hate. I thought about the years I'd spent planning my revenge, executing it, savoring every moment of his downfall. And I thought about Sarah, about our life together, about the peace I'd found. I forgive you, I said. His head snapped up. You? What? I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want to carry it anymore. I stood up. You took enough from me, Marcus. I'm not giving you any more of my life, not even my anger. I left him sitting there, and I felt lighter than I had in years. 20 years after the divorce, 40 years old, living in my second life, my better life, I stood on stage at another conference. But this time, the topic wasn't business. It was resilience. Some of you know my story, I told the audience. Some of you know that I built Hartford Enterprises from the ruins of a marriage that nearly destroyed me. Some of you know about the divorce, the betrayal, the revenge. I paused. But what you might not know is that revenge isn't the end of the story, it's the middle. The beginning is deciding you're worth fighting for. The end is building a life so good, so full, so completely yours that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. I looked out at the sea of faces, women and men, young and old, all of them carrying their own wounds, their own battles. I'm not going to tell you to forgive the people who hurt you. I'm not going to tell you to let it go or move on or any of that nonsense. What I'm going to tell you is this. Take back what's yours. Fight for it. Claw for it if you have to. And then, once you have it, build something so beautiful that the past becomes nothing more than a story you tell at conferences. The applause washed over me and I smiled. Because I'd done it. I'd lived the life Marcus tried to steal from me. I'd built the empire he'd dreamed of. I'd found the happiness he'd destroyed. And the best part, the part that made all of it worthwhile, I'd done it without him, without his approval, without his help, without his name. I'd done it as myself. Alexandria Hartford, not Marcus's wife, not Patricia's daughter-in-law, not the woman who'd been too weak to fight back. Just me. Finally, completely, triumphantly me. That night, I called Catherine. We talked every few months now, comparing notes on our impossibly busy lives, laughing about the old days. I saw Marcus today, I told her. And? And nothing. He's just a man. A sad, broken man who made bad choices and paid for them. Do you regret it? She asked. The revenge, I mean. The scorched earth approach. I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. In my position, with what I knew, with what he'd done, I'd do it all again. But I don't think about it anymore. It's just history. Good, Catherine said. That's how you know you've won, when they become history instead of headlines. We hung up and I sat on my balcony watching the city lights. Sarah was asleep inside, her book open on her chest, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. My company was thriving. My life was full. My heart was whole. And somewhere in this city, Marcus was probably regretting everything, as he should. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I'd signed that severance package without reading it. I'd trusted my lawyer to protect me. And in doing so, I'd taken back my life, my power, my future. Triple the assets. Triple the victory. Triple the life I'd been denied in my first attempt at living. The pen had been his. But the signature, the life I'd built with that signature, that was all mine. And it was more than enough.